Good afternoon, everyone. This is Clint Anashesky with Bay Capital Mortgage. And today I'm here to share some information with you regarding the Uniform Residential Loan Application. This is a document that has remained tried and true in our industry, and it has been used for all of the 20 years that I've been in the business. This is really our first step in getting information from our borrowers and applicants so that we can start the financing process, whether it be for the pre-qualification into the pre-approval, and to really get a grasp on what type of financing they're going to qualify for. So without further ado, we're going to go through loan application. Essentially, I'm going to go through sort of as I would take a loan application with a borrower, and it's very self-explanatory in following the the information that is on the residential loan application. One thing that I'll say is, many originators may, enter the information directly into their loan origination software. I tend to do that, but I also still do handwritten versions depending on how difficult or how much information the borrower may be sharing. So I find that, having a hard copy with all the information wet printed becomes very handy and very useful, especially when I'm going back and going through my notes. So without further ado, I always start obviously at the top. We may not know the loan amount, the interest rate, and the type of financing. Generally, we're going to narrow that down as we go through the loan application and get more information from them. But once I do, I certainly, check and let, to give myself reminders of what types of financing we'll most likely be using. Starting in section 2, assuming if this was a refinance, we would have a subject property. If this is not a refinance, this might be a TBD where I would simply enter, the area, city, maybe county that the borrower is going to be looking. So, I try to narrow down at least a section where the borrower may be looking. Of course, we'll notate whether or not it's going to be a purchase or a refinance. For refinances, it's very important to get the information in terms of when the borrower first acquired the property, what they purchased it for, the amount of the existing balance, the purpose of the refinance. All this is going to be very important in determining, what the terms are going to be. And it's all information that the underwriter is going to need on the final underwriting submission. And of course, it's going to be listed on your final loan application at closing. Something else that's always important, well, it's all important, but this is equally as important, is the title, the title that the names will be held in. I'm always sure to ask for the legal name that the title's held in. So that way it matches any title work and all the documentation matches so that we have the legal name. And of course, there could certainly be people that are on title that may not be on the loan. So we want to make sure that those folks are accounted for, because we have to make sure that the title company is aware, and that also during the processing and underwriting stage that they're aware of that information. The estate, whether it's fee simple or leasehold, we do quite a bit of business in Baltimore City, which tends to have some ground rent. So it's always important to ask if the folks have ground rent. Generally, most properties are fee simple, but we should definitely be asking that. On to section 3, this is the borrower information. And then this is where we're really going to start getting into the Fed 6 and the TRID information that's going to make this an official loan application. So as everybody knows, there's the 6 pieces of information that make this an official loan application in which you have to disclose. Name, income, social security number, address, a value, and an estimated loan amount. So this information is going to make an official loan application, and you're going to get most of this information during this process of the loan app. So of course, we always start with the borrower's legal name, first, middle, last, social security number. In this day and age, we get, cell phone number and a home phone number, date of birth, and years of school. They still, for the loan application, still require the number of years the person went to school. So I always, make sure I ask for that information. We find out if our borrowers are married, unmarried, or separated. This is obviously important. If they're separated, then this could lead to us requesting some additional information. Divorce decrees, could be some child support, could be executed separation agreement. So again, very important information. Number of dependents. Again, this information, the number and the ages will go on the loan application. A lot of the programs that we have now, as you all may know, are credit and income related. And so the number of dependents may play a factor into that. Ages, of course, is going to let us know if the borrower is unmarried. This may, give us a red flag to, inquire about child support, owed or received, alimony, owed or received. So again, very important as that all gets factored into our qualification. We're always going to get a 2-year history for the residency. So present address, owner, rent, and how long they have lived at that address. If they've lived there less than 2 years, I always get enough addresses so that I can account for 2 full years. Again, we're gonna go back. The credit report's going to give us a list of addresses, so we want to make sure that everything matches. And of course, we're going to match these addresses with the address that's listed on tax returns, pay stubs, W-2s. As we move on, we'll get the same information for our co-borrower as well. The next step, step 4, section 4, we're going to get into the employment information. Again, thoroughness is really the key with the loan application. We want to make sure that we get the name of the employer. We want to make sure that we get the address. I always ask for the address for their duty location, so where they actually work out of, the years that they've worked for that employer, and in the years that they've been in that profession. That's going to be important, especially for our commissioned employees who are going to need a 2-year history and may have changed jobs. So there's, the opportunity that even though they change jobs and they're commissioned, if they've stayed in the same line of work, that we can still use that as income. So, it's very important to make sure that we fill this out completely and find out, how long they've been in that line of work. I get their profession, their position, and then of course the business number. A lot of times, for me personally, they'll give me like a desk number. Generally, I ask for the HR number. So this way that I have it, my processor is going to have the HR number, so that it'll be easier when we do verifications of employments down the road. So just a tip that I like to use. And then of course we're going to find out if they're self-employed or not. If they're self-employed, this is going to lead to, additional questions and additional documentation. So you certainly want to make sure, I always ask my folks if they're W-2'd, salaried, or commissioned, but if they're W-2'd. And then I'll, if they're not quite sure, I'll ask, well, do you receive a 1099? Sometimes they may think, not realize they're self-employed in that they're a contract employee, but they're actually self-employed and receive a 1099. So again, just some things that I try to, be wary of when I'm speaking to everyone. And then of course, we want to do a 2-year history. So if my employer, my borrower hasn't been at this employer for 2 years, I certainly go back and inquire to as many employers as we need to get that full 2 years. And lately, what I do as we get to the end, we start getting to the end of the year, this is September. As I get to the end of the year, I really started from the beginning of 2018 through present. Because as we get documentation, the borrower may have had a job, say, from August of 18 through September of 2020, which would give them the 2 years, but they could have W-2s that aren't, that are listed for 2018 that aren't necessarily in that 2-year window. So, around this time of year, I try to make sure I account for all jobs from the beginning of 2018 through present. Just it's going to, you know, all the upfront work is just going to make things easier down the road and make this process a little bit more painless and streamlined as we get it into processing and into underwriting. So as you know, any W-2s that are provided to us, we have to account for. So it's always a good idea to have a good job history. Moving on from the job history, naturally we would go into income. I'll start by asking the borrower, you know, how they're paid, if they're salaried, if they're commissioned, if they receive overtime, just so that I get in my head what types of income and how I'm going to pose the next questions so that I can get good, solid income information. So for example, if a person's, you know, salaried, let's take a, you know, an easy breezy W-2 government employee, their salary's listed right on the top of their pay stub, their leave and earnings statement. You know, that right there is very easy, and we can, you know, calculate it, and I'll put that base employment income in. For some other folks that might be salaried, commissioned, receive overtime, bonuses, from there, I'm going to just have them break it out for me. I'll pose questions like, okay, let's start with your salary. How much did you receive in salary for the previous years and through the current year? How much have you received in overtime, and how much have you received in bonus? And I'm always certain to break it out because, as you know, it's going to be very important that we show that 2-year history for commissioned employees, for bonus employees, so that, you know, that way we have it in our mind what we're using for the qualifying income. So again, I try to be very careful in breaking out that income. And then moving on, we get into some income that borrowers may receive that, you know, may not be, you know, as traditional. Of course, it's going to be our retired borrowers. We may have some borrowers that receive trust income. We're going to have some borrowers that receive child support and alimony. So I'm always, you know, depending on who I'm speaking to, and of course, this goes back to the employment, you know, of course, if they're retired, we're always going to ask for pension income, Social Security income. A lot of times I ask, you know, how your income's derived for the year. Depending on age, they might have a minimum, they might have their, the draw that they have to receive after they hit 70 and a half years old, where they have to take the minimum required draw from the retirement. So that's all good qualifying income, and I always want to make sure that that's noted. Once we get through the income, we move on to the assets, and I start by asking where folks do their banking, and I try to get them to be as specific as possible in terms of where they do their banking, the type of accounts that they have, and the average balances that they keep in those accounts. I'll also ask about not only deposit accounts, but retirement accounts. I'll ask about any accounts that they have with, you know, let's say Ameritrade, so your investment style accounts, as those all can be, you know, used for either reserves or down payment requirements. So with this section, you know, I'm always getting an idea also if, you know, we have a retired borrower, is where their retirement is, their draws are being pulled from. So that way I know when I'm going to go back and request a full amount of documentation that I kind of have a breakdown of what their deposit accounts are going to be, which are used for the down payment and closing costs, but also going to have an idea of, you know, some liquid or some accounts that are actually going to be used towards asset qualifying. So again, the more thorough that we are in this section, the better. And again, I'll scroll and I'll ask them about some stocks and bonds. A lot of folks have, you know, some outstanding stocks or have bonds that they collect. So that way, you know, again, those are all good sources that the borrower may not naturally think about that we can use. But the biggest one too, and again, is retirement, especially with reserve requirements and, you know, the ability for borrowers to borrow against their retirement. I'm really, try to be diligent to make sure that we get retirement statement information. So especially our folks with the government, again, with TSPs, you can borrow against those. And most qualified retirement plans do allow you to borrow against them. So the applicant may not know that this is a good source of down payment income or down payment cash, but it really is. And that just gives us more, more information to help them achieve their goals. Liabilities, I don't spend too much time on, only because we're going to pull a credit report, and essentially we're going to pull the debts, the liabilities from the credit report right into that section. But I do ask them, when I'm talking with an applicant, I do say, let's go over some bills. So I will get an idea of student loans, of car payments, of credit card debt, housing debts, things like that. And then, of course, I'm always going to ask about current rent payment, and we're going to get a breakdown if they already currently own a home. I always ask them about their first mortgage, their total payment, and whether or not that's escrowed. So again, this section I equate in the liability section. But again, I don't go and request account numbers. I really, my main goal is to find out the monthly payment, is that all that information is going to be pulled in, and it's going to be more accurate from the credit report than a lot of times than what the borrower is able to provide. So from there, depending on the scope of the applicant, I'll also may reiterate, alimony, child support as a debt. So if it's, a person that may, pay that, may pay child support, I'm always quick to make sure I ask about that, because again, that does get calculated into the debt to income ratio. And then finally, for my VA borrowers, it's very important that you ask about child expense. So any child care, as I'm sure many of you know, the child care expense does get factored in to the debt to income ratio for our VA borrowers. So, this is a question that I've become accustomed to asking is, how much do you pay for child care on a monthly basis? And so that typically takes care of all my debts, and I'll have a good idea of what to expect once I pull the credit report. Moving on, we go to the schedule of real estate owned. And a lot of times borrowers only think about properties that they may have a mortgage on. But I try to make sure that they know that we need to know if they own any property, even if it's owned free and clear. We're just going to need some basic information on that so that we can calculate any taxes and insurance that may be on that property. And then another thing that I've been asking about as well are timeshares. So even if you own a timeshare, if you could, let me know if you own a timeshare. So those are two things, properties without mortgages, actually land, and then timeshares are a couple of items that a borrower may not normally think about when we ask about real estate owned. But I'm always, I always try to, reiterate those items just in the event that they do have those. And again, once we pull the credit report, they may not show up, but a lot of times addresses show up that need to be accounted for. So that's always, just good to make sure that we account for any possible land or addresses that they own. So moving on, the next big thing is Section 8 for me, is the declaration section. I usually go through line by line, and I won't necessarily do that, but obviously outstanding judgments and bankruptcies, foreclosures in the last 7 years are going to have a big impact on the type of financing that the applicant can get. It's going to be have a big, it's going to let us know what type of qualification issues we could run into, especially with foreclosures. That could knock us out of a conventional program, but certainly keep us in an FHA program. So, it's these are very important questions to ask up front. So that way, no one's necessarily blindsided, after we pull credit or as we start going down the, the road of the full pre-approval. And then again, I'll ask, if you've ever been a party to a lawsuit. And then, that's important because it could stem from any sorts of child support, alimony, things like that. And again, I'll just continue to go down. Usually it's the alimony and child support's already been covered. And then again, we ask about, whether or not you, have endorsed another note that you're a co-signer on a property that you might not be on title. And then the person that you've co-signed for could be making the payments. But again, we want to make sure that we're aware of any of this information, just so that we don't hit any snags or that we can troubleshoot sort of on the fly and before, we get too far down the road after pulling the credit report. And then finally, just, whether or not they've owned a property in the last 3 years, which again, should all be covered. And then from there, we'll, go through and I'll ask the ethnicity question, race question. And, if the borrower doesn't want to provide that information, then we certainly note it. But part of our due diligence is to ask, and I always make them aware. It's just, for tracking to make sure that, we're all being treated fairly, and that helps us and helps everyone with the tracking, and to make sure that, loans are being provided fairly across all races and ethnicities. So that is basically the 1003 residential loan application. Again, it's a document that has been, in existence my whole mortgage career, and it really, when done properly and done thoroughly, allows you to put in a great loan application to really be prepared and give your borrowers and buyers and customers the absolute best information and financing options. And so that way, the process can be a little bit painful at times, but I feel like, when you do this thoroughly, it really allows us to request all the documents that we need, and then the process is streamlined from there on out. So hopefully you guys all found this video helpful, and look forward to seeing everyone out there in the field, and hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. Have a great day.